Hi, I'm Mike Thornton from Production Expert, and today we're going to take a detailed look at the new Penteo 16 Pro Upmix and Downmix plugin. Now, the most obvious difference when you compare the Penteo 16 Pro to its predecessors is that it is a completely different graphical user interface. Although, of course, it looks completely different, all the elements that mark out the previous Penteo plugins are still there, although they've been developed and enhanced. In this video, I'm not going to focus on the sound, as it's not really possible to demonstrate the sound in this video other than to confirm that the Downmix matches the source, as you would expect with a Penteo Upmix plugin. Instead, I'm going to give you a detailed tour around the plugin and demonstrate what it can do. For the purposes of most of this demo, I'm going to focus on a stereo to 7.1.2 instance of this plugin. But one of the things I also want to make clear at the outset is because of some of the limitations in the way Pro Tools works, you can't force a plugin to up its number of channels without creating a new instance. So in this 7.1.2 version, I can go down to lower channel counts, but I can't go above effectively 10 channels. So what the team at Penteo recommend is if you want full compatibility, then go for the version of the Penteo 16 Pro, which is the stereo to third order Ambisonics. Now what that does is it gives you access to all 16 channels, which means you can go all the way up to the maximum channel counts and all the way back down to the lowest format 3.0. But as I say, for the most of this demo, I'm going to work with a stereo to 7.1.2 instance of Penteo 16 Pro. So let's start at the beginning, and on the left hand side, the input section, gone are the two rotary controls in the previous versions of Penteo. We now have 8 channels, which match the maximum number of Downmix channels that this new version of Penteo 16 Pro supports. And they've been very clever in integrating the level meter and the faders all into the one display. In the center of the plugin, we have the main control section, which will be remarkably familiar to existing Penteo users, with the 3 main controls supplemented now with an upper control to determine the balance of the upmix ending up in the height channels. The LFE section is now presented differently, but other than that, this is all very familiar to existing Penteo users. On the right-hand side is the output section, which not unsurprisingly can have up to 16 channels, but also uses the same clever design to integrate level meters and level controls into the one display. What this means is that the signal always travels from left to right, whether you're using the plugin as an upmixer or downmixer. Moving to the top of the plugin, there's a dedicated session management tool section that now includes presets, save, load, A/B comparisons, automatic plugin version and update notifications, as well as access to the settings panel. Under the input section, there's a button labeled Visualizer, which opens the Visualizer section, another new feature in Penteo 16 Pro. When you've got height channels, you have this option of 2 different displays. You can either display the visualizer in 2D view, so you get a plan view of your room, and then essentially a view of your room from the back. Or you can go into this split mode where you have the same plan view, but here you've got a 3D version, which you can move around and have a look. And you'll see how the graphics in this actually interact to give you an indication of how the audio is reacting to the space and where the energy is coming from. And the colours, both in the visualizer and across the entire plugin, can be changed from the settings window. So you can go in and change these colours. Staying with the visualizer for a moment. Now, if you're upmixing to Ambisonics, then there's a real challenge in how to visualize the ambisonic signals, as the channels now don't relate to speaker positions. So what the designers have decided to do is to use a virtual 7.1.4 speaker array to give you an indication of how the sound energy is being distributed around the Ambisonics sound field, as it's the only valid way to use the visualizer with Ambisonics formats. You can see again we've got the same ability to spin round, look above, move around to get a sense of where the audio is playing from. And whilst we're talking Ambisonics, the good news is that Penteo 16 Pro supports both the Ambix and the Fuma channel audios up to third order, which of course requires the 16 channels. Back to the input section, and not only do you have the meters, but you can also adjust the gain by getting hold of these little bars here. So this is now adjusting the gain of the left-hand channel. And you've got the usual way of default, or you can adjust the right-hand channel, or using this arrow here, you can adjust the gain of all the channels, in this case just stereo, together. And again, we can put that back to the default 0. And you can also solo or mute the input channels using these solo and mute buttons. In the center section, the first control, the center control, changes the level of the synthesized discrete center channel, just as it did in the previous versions of the Penteo Upmix plugin. But there's a new feature here. There's this center mode section drop-down menu, and you've got 3 choices. The default option relates to the Penteo music setting that you had on previous versions of Penteo. Discrete is the new hard center, and composite was formerly known as Stereo Plus in previous versions of Penteo. The left and right surround controls rebalance the sound energy into by pushing up or away from by pushing down the side surround channels, as does the left rear surround and right rear surround controls. So this is now putting more energy into the rear surrounds. In order to redistribute it, it's taking energy away from elsewhere. And by bringing it down, it's putting less energy into the rear surrounds and putting that energy elsewhere in the mix, so that we always get this 100% ITU downmix compatibility. So back to the preset. The boost button above the side surrounds control shifts the energy from the rear surround channels into the sides, and this is really useful if you want the side surrounds to be more connected to the front speakers. The LFE section here replicates the LFE section from the previous versions of Penteo, but in a much more compact way. And then to the right, we have a new control reflecting the new immersive formats that are now supported in the Penteo Upmix plugin. And this relates to the height speakers, the uppers. And again, in the same way as we can redistribute the energy in the surrounds, we can choose to put more energy into the uppers and therefore take some of the energy away from elsewhere, or equally we can pull this down and not put as much energy in the height channels, and so that energy is then redistributed around the Upmix sound field. Above this control, we've got a drop-down menu here, which has 4 preset modes for how the sound will be directed or not into the upper channels. Finally, down here underneath the new upper control, we have this drop Vox button. And what this does is it redirects anything that was destined for the center channel away from the height channels. So if you've got dialogue, which is usually the main component in the center channel, with this button activated, you can make sure that as little dialogue as possible ends up in the height channels. On the right-hand side, the output section mirrors the input section and has the same solo and mute buttons, so we can easily listen and check to see what's coming out of each individual speaker. We also have these link buttons. So if I link that together, now when I press the solo, it links all the 3 front channels together, or the side surrounds, or the rear surrounds, or the uppers, the height channels. And of course, if you were listening to these in full Dolby Atmos, you would obviously hear the appropriate sounds just coming from the relevant speakers. There are also gain controls in this output section, but by default the output gain controls are disabled. This is because if you adjust the output gains, you mess with the careful distribution of sound energy around the channels, which is key to getting that 100% perfect ITU downmix compatibility. So to enable the gain controls, you need to press this button here, and notice you will get this warning control that you are going to do something which is not going to produce a perfect downmix. So if we want to proceed, yes. And now you'll see that I've got the same gain control options on the output section that I do on the input section. So I can change the gain, and then notice up here what's happening. The downmix monitor, which if everything is correct, it shows a 100% perfect downmix. As soon as I start changing the gain controls, it gives me a percentage indication of how much I'm degrading the downmix compatibility by. And obviously, the larger the change in gain, the worse the compatibility gets. So we'll turn that gain mode off, and I would strongly recommend that you stay away from adjusting the output levels, as using them will compromise your downmix compatibility. But if that's less of a concern for you, then you do have the option to change the channel output levels. One last button in the output section is shelf. When you enable this, it activates a low pass filter in the upper channels, which can roll off the higher frequencies of these top channels. But unlike changing the gain, this won't have a negative impact on the downmix compatibility. Any changes made with this filter will be compensated for in the Penteo Upmix algorithm. Now, some existing Penteo users might be wondering where the quad and triangle modes have gone. Well, don't worry, they're up here in the output drop-down menu. So for quad, we go for the 4.0 or 4.1, depending whether we want to feed the LFE channel or not. So let's go for 4.0, and here we are. We have the quad mode that we know and love from previous versions of Penteo. What it's doing is it's feeding, in this case, this blustery wind sound effect into the front left, front right, rear surround left, and rear surround right, which is absolutely great for sound effects like this, where we don't want the sound effect to appear in the center channel. Moving on to the triangle mode, again, it's here, and you've got the option of not feeding the LFE channel or feeding the LFE channel, so we'll go for that. And again, very familiar territory for existing Penteo users. The dialogue is largely routed to the center channel, and you'll have to take my word for it. And then the music, anything that would not normally be in the center channel, is routed to the rear left and rear right surround channels.
Uma will be here shortly. If he has chosen to throw me out of this house onto the street, I am ready. I am ready.
What I want to do next is just show you the Downmix version of the plugin. So obviously here we've got a 7.1 upmix, so stereo, through the processing to produce a 7.1 output. The visualizer showing here the plan view. There's no height channels, so no 3D option. So if we look at its corresponding downmix, you see now that the channels swap over. So we've got 8 input channels for the 7.1 configuration, same color coding, same controls, same options, but now obviously out to a stereo output, and that's what is being displayed by the visualizer. So it's exactly the same. Signal always travels from left to right whether we're in a downmix option or we're using an upmix option. The signal always travels through the plugin from left to right. But before we finish, I thought it'd be really good for you to just listen to the downmix compatibility. So here we have now the stereo source. So this is what I'm feeding all these different upmixers. So we've got 5.1, 7.1, 7.1.2, and then we can listen to each one of these. So now you're listening to the stereo. 5.1, 7.1, and 7.1.2. Now, because the downmix options for the Penteo only go as far as 7.1, I'm using the Avid stock downmixer for the 7.1.2. But because that's the standard ITU specification, it all works nicely. So 7.1.2, 7.1, 5.1, stereo. And so hopefully you can hear from that demonstration that the sound remains, to all intents and purposes, the same, just as it did with all the preceding Penteo Upmix plugins. But as I mentioned at the beginning, it's not really been possible to actually demonstrate what the upmixes sound like, so you'll have to take my word for it. But what I would recommend is that you go onto the PerfectSurround Penteo site and apply for a 14-day free trial so that you can try it out for yourself at no cost on the content that you know and be comfortable that it's going to do what you want it to do. But if you want to know what I think about Penteo 16 Pro, then click on the link and you'll be able to learn much more about Penteo 16 Pro and read what I think about it in detail. I'll see you again soon.